Welcome everyone to one of our national Next Generation GP webinars. We haven't had one for a while, so it's great to be here. And tonight's topic is really by popular request. So I had quite a few people asking if we could do a webinar based on sustainability in general practice. So we've got an absolutely amazing panel. Before we get there, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's Nish. I'm a GP in Cambridge and I set up Next Generation GP about 5 years ago. And I've got two of our team with us tonight I'm really grateful for. So Liam, who many of you will know from previous webinars, also a GP trainee in Cambridge here close to me. And he's currently one of the National Medical Director Clinical Fellows at NHS England. And Veena, who is a Chief Sustainability Officer Clinical Fellow and a GP trainee, and she'll tell us a bit more about what that means. And we've got an absolutely fantastic panel for you tonight. Couldn't ask for better speakers. So Aarti Bansal is a GP in Sheffield. She's Net Zero GP lead for Humber Coast and Vale ICS, and the founder of Greener Practice, which we're going to hear more about tonight. We've got Dr Honey Smith, who is chair of Greener Practice, and she's a GP in East Sheffield, and her practice won the 2018 RCGP Green Impact Award for its efforts to reduce its carbon footprint. And finally, Dr Tamsin Ellis as well, who's a GP in London and the North Central London ICS Net Zero lead for primary care, and an associate at the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. I hope I got that right, everyone, but do feel free to add more to your bios when we get going. Just a few house rules. So if you could keep your videos on, thank you for those of you who already have. It's just nice, if possible, for the speakers to feel a bit of presence in the room rather than those black tiles, but appreciate people are juggling lots of things. If you can turn them on when you can, that would be great. Please do stay on mute throughout the session unless we get to the question time. What I'd really appreciate is if you just drop questions in the chat as we go. We will leave time for questions. That would be great to have a really energetic discussion. So put your questions in the chat. When we get to that point, I'll ask you to unmute, turn your video on and ask your question. But equally, if you've got things going on at home and you prefer one of us to ask, just let us know. And you can keep tweeting as we go if you like at NextGGP. So we'll aim to finish by around 9:15 at the latest, so it won't be a late one. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to our host, Veena.
Hi, thank you so much, Nish. My name is Veena Aggarwal. I'm a GP trainee in South West London. At the moment, I'm on secondment, so I'm working at NHS England as my official title, which is very long, is the Chief Sustainability Officer's Clinical Fellow. So it's a year where we work in NHS England and policy, working with the Greener NHS team and also another team. So I work in the primary care team at NHS England with Liam and Nish, and it's an opportunity for us to spread the word about sustainable healthcare into different teams and try and work on some projects. So I'm currently working mainly on sustainable inhalers. So anyway, enough about me. I should also say that I'm a co-chair of Greener Practice South London. So really, really exciting, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. So thank you so much for having me. Really excited to have Honey, Aarti and Tamsin with us tonight. So I'm going to first hand over to Tamsin, who's got a little bit of a presentation for us, and then we'll have some discussion after that. Thanks, Tamsin.
Thanks, Veena. I'm just going to check I'm sharing the right one again because I did the wrong one before. So hopefully you can see my screen. Is that, yes, I can see a thumbs up. Perfect, thank you. So I just was asked to give a very brief introduction to what Greener Practice is. So we're not going to be going through like carbon footprinting everything and telling you about the content of what we deliver, but I just thought I'd give a bit of the background. Aarti and Honey, feel free to jump in because I'm the kind of newest member of the bunch to Greener Practice. So tell you a little bit about the journey of Greener Practice. So Greener Practice was set up by Aarti in 2017, and it was, she can tell you more, but it was based on a pub conversation, which as some of the best ideas are, where a colleague of Aarti's asked her, how can we get our professional community engaged with action on the climate crisis? And on the back of that question, she got thinking and met with a few other people and started off in a very small group. And I just put the logo involvement on here as well, because I think the first time that I'd come into contact with Greener Practice, I saw that first logo on the left, and you can see it's kind of the design of it has changed as the groups have changed. So just to give a bit of timeline, after it was set up, the group grew in Sheffield initially, Around that time is when I got involved in 2019, because the RCGP had created a task and finish group and declared a climate emergency, and lots of people who were kind of starting to get interested in this, and that greener practice Sheffield model started to be sort of disseminated about how they were running things there. And myself in London and a few other people in Brighton and Glasgow were kind of interested in how we might set up groups. So I think London was the first one that we set up back at kind of in 2020. And now there's 26 and growing groups across the UK. Around 2021, we have special interest groups that formed, which meant that we have kind of 6 groups that are mainly on WhatsApp, but we try and do some dissemination of information, things like respiratory education, because we realised that people within the Greener Practice Network had a huge amount of knowledge and resource that we wanted to try and share, but people also were interested in their specific thing. You know, some people are really interested in recycling or waste, for example. Just recently, we can't remember exactly when it was, maybe Honey will be able to tell us, we set up as a community interest company, and it's now we have kind of, you know, we can be commissioned to provide services. So now we are doing more working with partnerships with other organisations within the NHS, and we've been doing a few pieces of work around sustainability. So that's just the brief overview, but lots of what we're doing I'll come on to, but it's all about asking questions and being curious, and we spend a lot of time in our local meetings using this principle of thinking time to ask more questions. I just thought it was interesting on Aarti's story of starting with a singular question and how asking more questions has helped us to grow and develop as a group. So we are primarily a network. We are a primary care sustainability network, which means we're made up of people who are interested in this. But within that network, we do various functions. So we have the local groups, like I said, so places like London, Sheffield, Glasgow, where people are normally meeting every kind of 4 to 6 weeks and having discussions and having meetings to discuss about what they can take action on locally. And then we join that up into a national network where we discuss at the local level how we might influence the national level. And then, like I said, with the special interest groups and within those networks, with those kind of people working on various things, it's been a really great place to have a kind of hub of information and sharing of resources and kind of things like patient information leaflets. If people have set up projects that have gone really well, it just means it's kind of disseminated out that way. And then a huge amount of what we're trying to achieve is so people can have a place to have these conversations and take action. And I think that's been, hopefully we'll share a bit of our journeys, but that's certainly something that's been energizing for me, as I've seen this kind of really hopeful way of working in which collaboratively we can take action through having conversations. So we've got our local groups, and within that we try and have a bit more of a national voice, and we are being asked more and more to have a national voice. So I recently went with a few others to the Mayor of London Summit about air quality, and we were there on behalf of Greener Practice and the RCGP, and we're asked to kind of, you know, go to more and more national level groups. I think Aarti goes to the Respiratory, NHS England and Improvement Group. And like I said, with becoming a community interest group, it's been a really good place to think about how we can create more partnerships. So recently we've done a piece of work with the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare on an ICS green plan, for example. And we're aiming that when we relaunch the website in April, we've got some funding from the Health Foundation that will provide a bit of a one-stop shop so that people want to get interested. They can come on our website, have a look at what we do, have a look at what you can do as individuals, as organisations, and how you can get involved. And I think the key thing for me in my journey, this is Aarti and I at COP26 last year, is that in London, we kind of based our group around this quote, which was to never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And it was really amazing to go out to Glasgow and meet the Glasgow group and just find that there's so many people doing amazing things and that we can all share and learn from all doing that together. So my final point for you as kind of the next gen GPs is, we'll tell you a bit more about our stories, but I very much didn't aim to be a leader. I didn't start this thinking I was going to lead anything, but I think I wanted to see change. And I saw this animation that just really speaks to me, which is that lots of us want to see change. A lot of people kind of want to change, but not many people want to lead it. It's a difficult thing to do. But what I found through Greener Practice is it's been a really good network to support becoming a leader. And we are looking for more people to join us. So if you would like to get involved and join at the end of this discussion, then we would be very welcoming of you to join us. Alongside us, there's lots and lots of people doing amazing things in the climate and sustainability and health conversation. So some key bits that I'd say just to pick up on is Healthcare Without Harm do some really interesting things. There's lots of kind of global health discussions. Race and Health have some fantastic podcasts about health equity. You've got people like Dr for XR and MedAct, and like I said, the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, we run a course for primary care. So if you want to come and workshop and have a really interactive session, then it's a good place to get started as well. There's plenty more people. I think I saw Helen on the call, so Freem has some fantastic examples. I normally put that on my slide as well, but I forgot this evening. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll hand back to Veena.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. That was a really, really inspiring presentation. I also meant to say that we'd love to do a Q&A with some of you later, so please do pop some questions in the chat, and if you'd like to ask them, then I'll ask you to just unmute yourself and ask the questions. But if you'd also like me to ask a question on your behalf, then please sort of message me privately and I can ask that as well. So I wanted to ask the first question to all of our 3 speakers today. I wanted to ask you where your passion for sustainable healthcare started. Aarti, shall I come to you? Can't hear you, Aarti.
So this is because I've got another screen and then I couldn't get the mouse to move from one screen to the other. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay, so the question was, how did the passion start? So yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, I think Honey would agree with me that we probably have been quite environmentally aware for a long time. So I'm in my mid-40s now, and I remember, like, back in the 90s, I remember being a sixth form student and getting very passionate about the Amazon rainforest, finding out it was the lungs of the world and being worried about acid rain and all of that kind of thing. I even remember doing an assembly, you know, like at that time. And then I thought I was quite aware, but I wasn't really that involved for quite a long time, you know, like, so I would get emails and newsletters. I'd do a little bit of click activism, but I wasn't really that involved. Then what happened was, some of my really close friends in Sheffield started to get quite active before the Paris climate talks. So this was back in 2015. And they were getting active with this umbrella organisation called Sheffield Climate Alliance. And doing a Sheffield event prior to the Paris climate event. So I was just doing a few things on the side, and I thought, if I'm going to start talking to the public about all of this, I really need to go back to the science. And when I went back to the science, I was like, oh, I didn't actually know a lot. So, you know, I knew about the greenhouse gas effect. We all know about that. I knew that we needed to act. What I really didn't understand was the urgency of the crisis. I didn't know, for instance, that, you know, the world, the atmosphere rather, has a carbon budget, that you can't just keep pumping things in there and then at some point in the distant future think, oh yeah, well now we'll do something brilliant and technological to sort all of this out. That this was my generation's problem and it was this decade's problem. And basically the rest of future, for not just my children's life, but for their children, the children after them, you know, for a very long time, depends on what we're doing now. And initially, when I sort of learned about that, I was a bit paralyzed and felt like, this is too big. I feel really overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. A little bit of head in the sand stuff, just sort of feeling really responsible, sort of thinking, oh my God, you know, as parents at the time, my children were like 7 and 4, I remember. We all just want the best for our children, but this is the one thing that is going to have the biggest impact on their future, what we do now to address the climate crisis. But then I just thought, well, I've got to do something, you know, I have to do something just to be able to look myself in the eye a little bit. I know that sounds a bit, it's not meant to sound grandiose or anything, because it isn't. I just felt like I needed to do something, and I needed to be able to look my children in the eye. So it just happened, as Tamsin's kind of mentioned, that one of the people who knew that I was active with the group who were organising for the Sheffield event was also the provost of our local RCGP faculty, and he sort of said, he asked that question, he said, what can we do to get our professional community engaged? And because I hadn't felt very empowered as a citizen trying to do something around climate change, I just thought, well, maybe this is a sphere where I can have some influence. And also there really wasn't anything happening at the time. So I get a bit like Tamsin, you know, I didn't set out to lead something. I just set out to do something. And I guess I've always been motivated by what is the big picture here and what can we do? And I think that's kind of led everything that's happened since, really, in greener practice. But it started from way back. I'm going to let Honey or Tamsin come in now.
Brilliant, so inspiring, Aarti. Thank you. Honey, I'll come to you next.
Oh, thanks, Veena. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I would agree. I think I've been climate aware to some extent all my life, but for me, when I was growing up, it was always about the animals. It was about the polar bears and the rainforests and the koalas and all that sort of thing. And I had this real sense of sadness that we were trashing the world, but it was much more about the animals, and that we had no right to do that to the animals, and that was quite a strong theme when I was growing up, and I did a little bit of sort of activism with the Worldwide Fund for Nature when I was a teenager and so on, but was when I moved to Sheffield in 2006 that I just began to get an inkling that actually this had something to do with human health as well. I really had not cottoned on to that at all. And I can remember going to the university. I wanted to find out what was going on in medical school education, and so I shadowed somebody at the university called Jason Horsley, who was doing some public health. He was a public health doctor, and he was doing a block for the students on the climate crisis. And I felt as if I'd been hit by a 10-ton truck. I just had this feeling of I had no idea that our very existence is threatened. I didn't really believe that until I heard the science. I just really couldn't get my head around it. And it was just so, and I absolutely echo what Aarti said. I was paralyzed by depression, actually, real deep depression. And then I couldn't do anything. And I felt I was still kind of trying to do things in my personal life. So trying to do less driving, less eating of meat, those kind of things to try and make my small impact. But I knew it wasn't really, not enough, because it was significant, but I wanted to do more. And after a while of feeling that I hadn't done very much, and that that I was just sort of empowering myself by my own personal actions, I then felt I'd educated myself and got enough under my belt to actually take it a bit further. So I went back to the medical school and said, I really want to do something about this. I want to do something in the medical school. And the medical school put me in touch with Aarti. And if I hadn't met Aarti, I think I might well have concentrated on dealing with medical education and doing something with the medical school. But it was absolutely finding a like-minded person for me that took me deeper and deeper into this, and in a little tiny group. It was really small when it started, but passionate, few people passionately engaged and going with their own things that made them excited about doing something. And I didn't seek a leadership role at all. I never saw myself doing this, but it just became the obvious thing to do next, was to take a leadership role to support other people in their journeys of leadership. And so it's been a really inspiring, hopeful journey. And I found the more that I do, the less room there is to be anxious and the less room there is to be depressed. So that's my story.
Brilliant, Honey. It's great to hear how things grew for you. And Tamsin, how did it start for you?
Yeah, so I feel a bit bad because I wasn't bothered about the climate at all and didn't think about it. I thought the outdoors was okay, but I hated camping. I was not the person that you'd normally consider an environmentalist. And then I probably have always had a bit of interest in sort of social justice issues, and I was kind of doing a lot of trying to do homelessness work and inequalities work when I was in my training. And then in ST2 of my GP training, the thing is, my story has changed because I thought I just walked down Oxford Street and seen a big pink boat when XR was doing their protests, but I've subsequently found that I was posting about getting a bamboo toothbrush and doing stuff before then. So I think something was happening around the cultural change that happened in 2018, 2019. Where I was seeing it in front of me and I was hearing it more. And I had this really kind of big wake up moment where, similar to sort of Aarti, I'd heard a bit about it. And what I was really confused by is I don't know if anyone's from London, but I went to the marches and I had no idea what XR were trying to say. I was there, people were crying and screaming, and I was like, why are they so upset? We've known this for ages. I remember seeing the sort of textbook of the globe in the greenhouse. And then my brother, I was with my brother at the time, and I came home, he was crying on the sofa, he's not a big crier. And I go, what are you doing? He said, have you read about climate change? And I was like, well, you know, and so I read The Uninhabitable Earth, I read, you know, other books about climate change and articles about climate change, tried to read the IPCC report and just found it really hard and not very digestible. So I was finding it hard to actually read the science, but I was reading the stories around it and reading about Indigenous people being killed and reading just lots of real emotion. And I just felt it so deeply. And it was like putting a switch on. I after I'd read it and heard it and talked to people, it was like I couldn't go back. And then suddenly it just completely overwhelmed my world. I remember at that time I was going on holiday to Kosovo to visit my friend who's a human rights lawyer. And I was just sat there so angry at my friends. I was like, why are you not all talking about it all the time? Why aren't we all talking about it all the time? It's gonna destroy our whole planet. It's just everything. And I very quickly learned through trying to do that and talk to relatives and friends that you don't switch anyone on with fear, as in you don't get people to join you with fear. And I thought actually what I probably need is someone to feel how I'm feeling. And around that time was when I got linked in with the RTGP group, and that's how I met initially Honey and then Aarti. And I just found this really welcoming place where people got it, and also where people were like, here's some things you can do with it. And I think a lot of my journey into doing things that have kind of put me in leadership roles has come from people giving me permission, because I found that I just didn't really know how to structure what I was doing or how to do something. I was an ST2, I felt like I had no power. And suddenly I had people really believing in me and saying, actually, it doesn't matter what level you are in your career, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you get that it's a human health issue, you're a doctor, you have advocacy. And it suddenly integrated with everything else I cared about. You know, I cared about women's rights, I cared about education, I cared about inequalities, and everything falls under this. So I just thought, actually, it's going to do all the things I want to do. And it's a really exciting field, you know, it's something that's really evolving and changing and you're creating. And it felt like it was kind of doing lots of things at the same time. So I haven't looked back because I think I don't see an alternative to what I'm doing. And that's kind of my journey.
Thank you, Tamsin. That's such a brilliant reminder of why this is so important. So thanks for your story. It'd be great to hear a bit about more about the process of setting up Greener Practice and kind of what that involved. Aarti, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so when we started, I think I started off, I remember the Director of Public Health was asked to, you know, can you find someone in primary care to go and be a public health, not a public health person, I can't even remember what it's called now, but it was something that public health were doing to help people be sustainability champions. And some of the people who are now in Greener NHS were sort of leading that whole movement. So I learned a little bit more. I connected with a few people, not really people in primary care, but I connected with a few people. And then I started to do a few talks. I remember my first talk was actually to a GP trainee conference. And at the time, my only connection was the climate crisis is going to impact on health. We're doctors. We have a responsibility to make sure that, you know, we're protecting health, we're not doing harm. But then my actions were still very much the kind of things that I might do in my personal life. Anyway, so I was talking about this stuff. And a few people came and said, I'm really interested in this as well. And actually, you only need one person to do that. You know, you can talk to 50 people, but you only actually need one person to come to you at the end of a talk and say, I'm really interested in this. And I remember there was a chap called Robert who came up and said, I'm interested in this. So a few of us kind of met, and very quickly we sort of decided that we needed an identity, and we needed to initially just have a place where people in primary care could learn about the connection between climate and health and have an idea of what first steps they could take. It was really that basic, you know, that first logo, the first very basic website. And Amar, who's the provost of the RCGP, he very sort of wisely sort of said, let's get a couple of people who have influence in, you know, in Sheffield and are interested in this area to come along to that initial meeting. They didn't actually stay with Greener Practice very long, those people, but they helped us set it up. You know, they helped get the word out. And then I think the other thing that Tamsin mentioned in that initial thing about thinking time, I don't know if anyone here has heard about thinking time. It's an approach by Nancy Klein. which is, it's a really brilliant way of getting the creativity of a group, you know, together. So you get the most, well, you get the most creative, energetic, open-minded thoughts. You think in a way that you didn't even know you had the ability to think using this process, but it's also a really, really democratic process. So I just learned about this in my academic role, and I thought maybe this is the way to set up greener practice. So that initial thing where we were, you know, meeting around the kitchen table, we started off having our meetings in that way. So we would ask a question and then everybody would come up with their most creative thoughts, and it, you know, would go around in a circle. People would have a little bit of time to think, and then we would share. And I think that's been really fundamental to the supportive nature of the network. So it's not a hierarchical organization at all. It's very, very horizontal. We value everybody. It doesn't matter, like, you know, Tamsin found, it doesn't matter if you're a medical student or you're retired or you're very senior in position or whatever, you know, like you have thoughts, you have ideas to contribute, and we really want to encourage that sort of collegiality. So, and I think that's been really, really important to us as well as a group. It was definitely very important to me when I started. And I guess the other thing to say is I was very clear that I wanted to enable and engage general practice. It's a bit sort of bouncing off from what Tamsin said. You can't make people care. You want to enable people to do something that is going to be good for the planet, good for people. So it very much started off with that ethos, is how can we encourage and enable and enthuse and engage people into this movement. So very similarly, we kind of like started with the ideas of the people who were there. You know, what did they care about? I remember like one of the people who came early on was really excited about e-bikes, you know, so we went with that, and we, you know, we said, okay, like what do we need to do to do something around getting healthcare professionals to learn about e-bikes? You know, we did a whole thing about that. Everybody had different things they were interested in. Somebody else wanted to do something around growing, helping people to grow food in plots of land in GP practices. So we started with that. Not everything happened that we thought was going to happen, but it's always been a very organic process. Yeah, and then I think I should really say that the key thing was finding Honey. So Honey was the first follower, and I'm sure you've all come across the first follower thing. And I don't like leader follower because it's not a great, we were a team basically. And what it meant is, because Honey and I found each other, we could be really relaxed about how much everybody else contributed. So we could have this really open way of sort of saying, come if you can, come if you've got time, contribute what you can, knowing that the two of us were completely committed, that we were going to come to every single meeting, we were going to follow up with everything else that happened. So we could allow everybody else quite a lot of freedom in terms of how much they engaged. And actually, it's amazing what two people can do compared to one person. You know, you only ever need 2 or 3, and we would sometimes be 2 or 3 people around a kitchen table, and sometimes it'd be 20, but it didn't matter because we had that continuity of, you know, moving ahead with whatever it was that we were doing. Sorry, that was a very convoluted answer.
That was a brilliant answer, Aarti, and so it really reflects my experience with the Greener Practice South London, which I'm co-chairing with a friend and colleague, and it just does make it so much easier having 2 of you bounce ideas off each other and really support each other. So that's a really brilliant lesson, and doing things in teams rather than by yourself is so much more fun and helpful, and just such a nicer experience. So yeah, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of us on this call as well. And were there any kind of major challenges or doubts that you had at the beginning, and how did you kind of get over those?
There's been challenges all the way through, and there continue to be challenges. I think the thing that's helped me keep going is this is better than nothing. You know, doing something is better than doing nothing. So when I'm thinking it's not enough or it's not good enough, or we need, you know, like I have to remind myself we're still doing something, and we're doing something in a space where there's not a lot of lot else that's happening. We've always been very clear about not duplicating as well what other organizations are doing. So it's always been about collaborating with every other organization and sort of, or we're trying to empower those organizations. We're trying to sort of make all the things that we're all doing better by working with each other. So we haven't, whatever we're doing in our space, I kind of think, okay, it might not be brilliant, but it's better than nothing. and it's not an amazing motto, but it does keep me going.
I think the other thing that keeps, I don't know, I think, Hannah, you probably say something, is that every time I think about giving up, every time I'm like, oh, this is too difficult, or you're getting too much pushback, and there is a lot of criticism in various realms as well, is that you get a win and then someone does something amazing and you hear these amazing stories and it just pushes you forward. And I find that the energy in the group, again, is the thing that really pushes that, because at the very beginning, when I was in ST2, I was going to local practices and talking to GP surgeries and just turning up and sitting in their practice rooms and feeling really silly. And as soon as you had connection with someone else who'd done that and said, oh, I've done that, and like, this is what happened, and you just, that support is so integral to pushing you along, pushing you forward and pushing you further.
And I think from my point of view, one of the things that does make me sometimes, because I didn't expect to be in a leadership role of anything, well, that wasn't in my thinking at all, and ended up slightly by default, getting into that role. And I think, when we set up the WhatsApp groups, the special interest groups, there was this extraordinary rush of energy. I mean, it was just absolutely overwhelming, really. And you realize that there was this network out there that were doing loads of stuff. And at one level, that was really wonderful and inspiring. From a personal level, the doubts that I then had were around, well, I haven't done any of this stuff. They're doing far more than I am, and I'm supposed to be the leader. This is crazy. But actually, I think what really helped me in the end was to realize that my leadership role is about nurturing other people in their leadership roles, and, being in a way a bit of a mother hen around, supporting people who are emerging as new leaders and supporting other people in their journeys. And at the moment, even if I was even if I could do the other things, that all these amazing things that other people are doing, I don't have time, because actually I'm just holding a lot of other people. And I love that. That's a really lovely way of doing leadership. And I think it's a really good way of doing the whole thinking time model, and the flat hierarchy and the teamwork is really good for people who are not so confident in their leadership roles. I would possibly say it, I mean, this is a bit stereotyping, that it maybe particularly supports women to become leaders, because, there's that kind of sense that to be a leader, there's an archetype around, I have to be all singing, all dancing, I have to know what I'm doing, I have to be really strong and decisive and all that sort of thing. And actually, we're probably quite strong, actually, but we're not necessarily incredibly decisive, because we decide together. We nurture each other into those decisions, and that is so powerful and has been so supportive. So yeah.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Tamsin and Honey, actually, that the other thing that's kept me going is just the people. It really has been all about the people. I feel like we're a family. I really felt that when, I know that, but I really felt that when we went to Glasgow, Tamsin, and we went to COP, and we were welcomed by the Glasgow, Greener Practice group in over there. They opened up their homes to us, and I just felt like this is actually a huge community of people. It's my UK-wide family. Turn up anywhere and say hello to another Greener Practice member. But it's just been wonderful to support each other, and we've all bounced ideas and thinking, and we all do all the time still. The three of us are just constantly talking and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? And that's how we know that we'll get there with sort of better thinking, better decisions.
I was just going to say briefly, because your question was about practicalities of it as well. And I think the practicalities around, I tried to write a guide about how we set up the London group when it was one of the first groups. because I knew that Honey was going to get tons of emails just saying like, how do I set up a group? What do I need to do? Who do I need to speak to? And so I think in some ways doing things the first time is hard, but it makes it doing the second, third, fourth time easy. And I think there's probably models of that in other organizations, you know, like what Aarti was just saying there made me think about parkrun. You know, you can go to any parkrun in the country and you'll find a group there that if that model is made, then you allow for local changes, but you also can kind of really empower people to make decisions about starting something up. And it's amazing at the national leads meetings, we have new leads join all the time from the national group, and it's always the same questions. It's always like, I haven't done anything in my practice, am I okay to say to people to do that? You know, people have these real imposter syndrome feelings across the board, that again is a universal thing that made me feel closer to everyone. So I think on a practical level, there's a sense of having peer support in a practical way and having models in a practical way that makes growing groups easier, in my opinion.
And I think there's also something about, I think that's absolutely right. And there was also something about, we invited other leaders to come to the South Yorkshire group so that they could see how we did it, just like get an idea that it's actually not that scary. The lovely thing about chairing and thinking time exercise is that actually the chair really doesn't have to do that much. It's not, you know, the chair doesn't have to generate all the ideas or the actions. It's actually, it's done by the group. It's a very, as Aarti said, a very sort of collegiate thing. And that's tremendously helpful. And I think that does help the new leaders to sort of get a sense of how they might run their groups without it being too scary. And the other thing that I found hugely helpful, so we decided, we realised through thinking time that there was a real need for new leaders to possibly have a bit of support and nurturing if they were struggling with certain aspects of the leadership role. So we set up sort of a drop-in session after the national reps group, and initially it was going to be after the South, because I used to be the South Yorkshire chair, and it was after the South Yorkshire meetings as well, to just say any leaders from around the country who wanted to pop in and just have a chat on Zoom, you know, would be very welcome. And we now do that after all the national reps meetings so that people can stay on afterwards. And Tamsin just unilaterally decided to stay on after the meeting and share her gems from leadership, and it was so fantastic, because you realised, didn't you, Tamsin, that actually, well, you know, that it might be helpful for you to be there. I didn't need to ask you, you just did it. And it was hugely helpful, because you had insights that I would not have thought of at all. And between us, I think we were able to really support the new leads, you know, just to get a feel for what it would feel like to lead a group for the first time. And that was just, you know, it's really great to know that we can tap into all these skills that people have and these sort of nurturing tendencies that people have in the group. So yeah, that's been fantastically helpful.
That's brilliant. Such great insights. Thank you so much. I'm happy to carry on asking questions and having this conversation, but I'd love to know if anybody in the audience has any questions they want to come in with it at the moment. So I'm happy for, I can't see any in the chat at the moment. I'm happy for anyone to kind of put the hand up or just kind of call out with one. If not, I'll carry on with questions. Everyone's feeling a bit shy today. No worries. Maybe just absorbing on the. Oh, we've got a question. Brilliant. Adam, do you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, all of you guys. This has been really interesting and inspiring. The thing I'm experiencing at the moment, but I haven't experienced in the past, is that change and getting people on board and buy-in and stuff can feel like a slog. You know, wading through treacle is the metaphor that comes into mind. How do you stay patient? You know, how do you? It feels like, you know, this is often a long game. And you know, yeah, how do you manage that?
I think my thing is that the starting is slow. So I think when you start off, well, this is my experience of it, is that I just felt like I was constantly facing people, you know, shut doors and people not listening to me, and like I said, I went around loads of GP practices, nobody was listening, and I just felt like, what is the point of me doing any of this? I'm getting myself so worked up. I really hate public speaking. I've got a bit better at it since, but at the time I hated it. I thought I'm forcing myself these positions that I don't want to be in order to try and affect change, and I'm making no change. And then I gave a grand round at my local hospital, which I was extremely nervous about. And we set up a group after that, and the hospital formed a board and it's still going. And I sort of thought, actually, you don't know what's going to be that tipping point. You don't know what's going to be the thing that you do that brings people with you. And so in some ways, I actually went to a BMA leadership thing, and I had this kind of scattergun approach. And I think I probably had a bit of a scattergun approach to it, where I just tried lots of things and saw what stuck. And then more recently, I've done a fellowship in leadership, and I got some really good advice that was work with the willing, because I thought, you know, in say my borough level, I thought I've got to get my 32 practices to sign up to make one change, and that's what everyone's telling me to do. And actually, I've had much more success with 8 practices who want to do something than the 32, than the have whatever 32 what I say is that don't want to do something. And then in a similar way, it's kind of pushing the open doors. So it's kind of working with willing and also going where the energy is. And I find that with that, you actually almost lose track. It's worth doing stock take of the changes that you're making, because the second piece of advice I got was around change theory, which I'm sure many of you know about, which is that winning your hearts and minds is not a simple task, but it's the most important one. And we did a bit of a roadshow locally, so I do work in Islington in North Central London, and we kind of did this kind of going around and talking to people. And it's that kind of drip feeding nudge sort of mentality of what ended up happening is somebody I spoke to about a year and a half ago from the States emailed me a few months ago. And so you don't know what that thing is going to be, stick with somebody of what you said. That means they're going to come back to you. And actually, if I sort of take stock now of what's happened, actually, like we got on the wall with my practice, and Greener Practice London has now grown and split, and Veena and Sharon are here who are chairing it, and all this stuff has happened, but I still don't feel like I've done enough. So I think sometimes even in you taking stock of the things you're doing, which I don't know what you're doing at the moment, Adam, but I'm sure there'll be things that you're doing that is already success, but you're not measuring it as success. So I think those are the things that I do is try and think about those theories of change, and also think I'm actually probably not appreciating the steps that I've made, because the goalposts keep changing. And it's very easy. I don't know if you've seen that kind of it's like a balloon thing of like, remember when you wanted what you've got. And at the beginning of this, all I wanted was to have people listen to me and have a group of people, and now I've got that, I want to go into the national forums, and it's very quick to forget. So that's how I feel, is that actually the progress has been incredibly fast. And I've seen even in the last 4 years at the national level, with incentives and various things changing, there is a shift happening for sure. It might not be happening fast enough, but it feels like things are changing. And so it's where you are on that change. That would be my, sorry, it's a bit of a waffly answer.
Yeah, I'm just going to say it's not easy to stay patient, particularly with this topic, because a lot of the time with change and leadership, they will say, let people get to where they want to go in their own time when they're ready. And we don't really have that luxury with this. So there's a continual push and pull, I think, within each of us as well, as to how much do we try and bring, allow people to get to a place, and how much do we need to get them to just get there. And that is difficult. And one of the ways that I think we manage that is just by occasionally having to rant to each other.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not patient. I'm not patient. I can't be a patient about this. It's, I'm desperately impatient for change. I just can't. I can't hold on to being patient. It just doesn't sit right with something that's as urgent as this. So I completely agree. But I think we do get we certainly get a lot of support from one another, because I find that when I go out into the big wide world and people just aren't getting it, and you just feel like that, that I don't know what they're hearing. They're hearing blah, blah, blah. I just don't know what they're hearing. And I do get really impatient. But I think being in a network that is where there are people who are feeling that same impatience actually is incredibly supportive. And I think that helps us to manage it and just tolerate it. I'd probably accept it even as part of the normal, what we should be feeling actually.
The other thing I should just plug here, I think we've probably all read this between the three of us anyway, is a book called Active Hope. Don't know if you've come across that, Adam, but it's really helpful as to how to keep your energy going with issues like this, which feel really huge, which feel urgent, existential. And the thing that I got from that book was, you do things because of your vision for the future. You're working for something that you believe is worth working for, not based on the probability of whether it will happen. And that really, really helped me, because I think if you decide, oh, well, you know, I'm doing all of this, it's unlikely to work, then as Tamsin says, you give up and you could be the tipping point. You know, you don't know. And talking, I guess the other thing that really helped me was Catherine Hayhoe's TED lecture, which is where she said, the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. And I think sometimes we don't really recognize all of those immeasurable things that happen from different conversations. And the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it and mainstream it and make it possible for things to happen. And I thought, well, everyone can do that. You know, we can all do that. So that feels quite empowering. I can still carry on talking about it.
The other thing I was going to say at a general level is I recently spoke to an inequalities fellow who's working in South London, and we had this really similar feeling of like people often saying things don't work. You know, people say, oh, we've tried that and it didn't work. And actually sometimes a new person coming into it and trying things like if it's not working, try something different. And actually she was saying how she'd had a huge amount of progress by kind of going into rooms and just saying this is what's going to happen, and like not really asking permission for it, and just saying like, well, we need to do this, so how are we going to do it? Not, oh, well, you know, because there's so many barriers within, particularly in the NHS, that actually having, and at the end of the day, what we're talking about in general, all of us, is kind of the power of connection. And I think whatever the motivating factor for people that you're speaking to, organisationally, that can be quite difficult, but that sort of trying things differently has also been a helpful thing. And I constantly, if I'm doing presentations, I constantly rejig what I'm putting in my slides. I never keep things the same. I always think about my audience. Those kind of things I think have been, I found, more successful than when I used to go around just saying, we're all gonna die. That's terrifying.
That's brilliant. Such an important kind of balance between doom and gloom and optimism and positivity, and I still struggle to work out what balance to strike between the two when talking to people about this. Does anybody else in the audience have a question they want to ask our speakers? Okay, I'm going to ask one while people are thinking. Oh, here we go. Catriona, did I say your name right? I'm really sorry if I didn't.
Yeah, it's Katrina, don't worry.
Sorry.
That really resonated so much about the sort of tension between the urgency and yeah, just the scale of what we're facing and the need to stay hopeful and like bring people along. So I'd be really interested to know if any of you have particularly sort of successful elevator pitches for the people you're just speaking to for the first time, like the casual conversations, to strike that balance of optimism and not repulsing people with fear or anxiety, but yeah, to compel them to join.
So my thing recently has been to try and get people to see this as an enabler of everything they want to do anyway to improve health for people, you know, and communities. So pitching it as, I think you have to put the urgency in there somewhere. I've tried not to talk about the urgency, but I think it's such a crucial part of it that you have to talk about it. So I do talk about the urgency, and then I talk about transformation, and I'll say, we've got transformation and it's coming, but we have to choose which transformation we're going to have. So we've got the transformation that happens if we don't do anything or if we don't do enough. And then we've got the transformation that we could actively work for. But actually, think about it. These are all the things we've been wanting for years. You know, this is about reducing health inequalities. This is about, you know, improving community health. All those determinants of health that we care so much about. You know, this is all the things. This is person-centered practice. This is reducing our workload. These are all the things that we're working for anyway. We just have another reason to do it soon. So that's my pitch at the moment. I do change the pitches occasionally, depending on the audience. but yeah, that's kind of my, I'm not very good at 30-second elevator pitches, but that's basically my pitch. Be interesting to hear Honey and Tamsin's pitch though.
Yeah, I think mine would be similar actually. I think it's a lot about appealing. I mean, I'm not very good at it either. I have to be honest. I don't think I am very good at this, because I think my impatience gets the better of me a lot of the time, and I just like, why don't you see this? Which is not very helpful. I don't do that to my patients, and I shouldn't do that to anybody else. But I do get impatient about it. So I think that gets in the way sometimes. But I think appealing to people's common values is a good way of starting, because actually everybody has a value that they want life to be better for their grandchildren than it was for us. And and in terms of our clinical care, as Aarti said, I think the fact that sustainable care is just excellent care is a really good pitch, because actually there's nothing in it, in the sustainability agenda, that would not resonate for people, as Aarti was saying, in terms of excellence, in terms of care. And then you can actually kind of say, oh look, you've just done sustainable care, you know. So I've just been talking to the medical school about, they've just our medical schools just included sustainability criteria in the QI project for the students, which is like a major breakthrough, because they're actually beginning to see this is just good, you know, this is just excellence. And we went through a few projects and said, well, where would the sustainability agenda be in this? Well, it's about health promotion, it's about disease prevention. That's the cornerstone of sustainable care. And you can see the penny begin to drop, that this is it's another lens through which to see healthcare that has another additional value, that not only are you improving the care of the patients in front of you, you're improving the care of the population, you know, and reducing inequalities and so on and so on. So I think I would take a very similar line and try not to bash their head against the wall.
I think there's something interesting, because actually in our Greener Practice London group recently, maybe Sharon and Veena can tell me more about what was said, but I think there was a really interesting, we asked everyone in the group what was the thing that sort of you remember from talks, or you remember from things that happened, and we had a lot of talk around hope versus fear. And what I find difficult is that fear is the thing that turned me to act, but actually I think bringing people with you doesn't, you do much more so in hope. So I think when Aarti was talking to Ed Miliband when we met him at COP, I think you did a really good elevator pitch where you were like, it can make everything better, you know, it can, if we get people using active transport, healthier diets, we can save you money, we can, you know, like, it was this really like energized, everything can get better with this. And what I tend to do is I find that when I go and talk to people, the first thing people do is talk about recycling. And I don't have anything against recycling, but like, it's not my thing that I like talking about. And so actually just switching to be like, the climate crisis is a health crisis, full stop. And you are going to see that in your GP room. So I often say, in the GP room, this is how you're going to see it. These are the patients you're going to see. You're going to see that old lady in fuel poverty, that child with asthma being triggered by air pollution. And the best thing is if we fix this, we fix those things, that we can improve those things, and that comes now. And I think air pollution is a really good one to come back to just say everyone wins. I don't see anybody who can fight against what we're trying to say about air pollution. How you do that is difficult, but the actual concept of it being, you know, the silent killer, and there's narratives behind it with Ellis, Deborah, I just think it's a really good, strong argument. So and the other thing I try and do is say, we haven't actually got the answers. No one knows if they're right. So it'd be great to hear your opinion on it, you know, so that you can kind of invite someone into the conversation, because people love doing barriers, but actually if you ask people what their solutions are, you know, there's tons of stuff that can come out of that conversation. And I much prefer to hear that from someone who disagrees with me than preaching to the converted. You know, like I did a GP training talk recently, and someone was sat in the front row going, oh, you know, it's the fossil fuel companies, and you're just coming in and talking to us about our individual changes. And I was like, totally agree with you, but what do we do as individual? You know, like what's the option here? What you've been trying to tell us secure boundaries. And I think that the positive thing that hopefully we're getting across here is that grassroots movements work, and we've seen that throughout history. So that's also something that I think energizes people to say that, like Honey was saying, your anxiety can be reduced by action, and we can all win. And since actually falling down the rabbit hole and learning even more, I've started to go more into kind of health creation, which is a whole other talk, and realize that actually this is about, we don't even get taught what health is really. And there's a huge amount to be said for, you know, I started cold water swimming as a result of this. You know, the kind of the benefits that I've got from doing this have been huge. And so I think for our patients, the way we have discussions, I just don't see any downside to it. I can see there's cost issues, but in terms of the person-centered care part of it, it's what we've been saying about for years, and I think pushing that agenda in a different way has been a huge benefit to the care that I give my patients. So that's kind of, that wasn't an elevator pitch, but that was around the houses approach to what I've said.
Brilliant, really, really good insights. Thank you so much. So if people here want to go away and start doing something in their practices for the first time, what kind of tips do you think you would give them as to what steps they can start to make?
Well, I would say have a look at the Green Practice website. So that's what it was there. That's what it's there for. That's what it was started for, really, was to be like a one-stop hub for primary care, to learn about what's the issue and what can I do about it. We are relaunching it. It got a bit busy, and one of the things that we're doing at the moment is creating a toolkit for people to safely and effectively improve asthma care at the same time as reducing the carbon footprint. And because there are some incentives coming through in the PCN contract that coming through in April, we're wanting to launch the toolkit at the same time. So as people are thinking about how do I actually do something around that incentive, they've got tools, so some people who've thought about it have actually made a really step-by-step guide. Anyway, as a result of having to launch this toolkit for that time frame, we've also had to rejig our website. And so you can have a look at our website now. There will be a new website in just over a week, which will hopefully be a bit more of an improved website with a little bit clearer navigation, because this time someone professional has helped us with it, whereas previously we've just done it all on our own. But particularly Honey has done a lot of it on her own. So yeah, go and have a look there. We've got all the links to the Green Impact for Health toolkit for carbon footprinting your practice, for doing SUS-QI. We'll have loads of links of information. Have a little look there is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go next? I mean, I think talking to people in your team is a really powerful thing to do, because just talking, as Aarti was saying, just talking about it constantly, is a really good way of just engaging people and just reminding people that it's important. And I suppose in terms of how we think about our clinical practice, finding out about the principles of sustainable clinical care and sustainable quality improvement, which are disease prevention and health promotion, patient empowerment, lean pathway, so trying to get the maximum. That's often been thought of in terms of finances, but in terms of carbon as well, the maximum bang for your buck, essentially. Streamlining care to make it the most sort of efficient and effective that it can be, and low carbon alternatives. And actually, if you then start to see your whatever quality improvement projects you do for your appraisal or whatever through that framework, it will very quickly, I think, become embedded in the way we think about care. And so I guess that would be the main thing. And obviously, the work that Aarti and Tamsin have done on the toolkit, I'm just going to say this because they won't say this, has been absolutely incredible. And it's going to be a fantastically useful tool to tick off some of that sustainable quality improvement work. So, they've done an amazing job on it. So I think that's where I'd start.
Thanks, Ellie. I was just going to say, if anybody's ever listened to a climate change health podcast, you would have already heard this, but there's the thing about the 3 Ps, which is what you do on a personal level, what you do on a professional level, and what you do on a political level. And I find that quite helpful, because obviously we need the grassroots, and there's all energizing doing our, getting our bamboo toothbrushes, but we also need systemic, huge, large scale change. And I felt that so acutely coming back from COP, that I was thinking it was about knowledge, and we were in rooms full of people who were hearing the same reports that we were hearing and standing up and saying, I'm not going to do anything. So clearly there's a huge amount of stuff that needs to be done, and that can feel really overwhelming. So I quite like thinking at kind of personal level, me thinking about getting my secondhand clothes and doing things sometimes makes me feel a bit better. At professional level, I get a huge amount of empowerment by trying to do things, at work with, in my long-term conviction reviews, doing a green set goal rather than telling them to get their HbA1c down and they're not bothered about. And then at a political level, making sure you're signing those petitions and making sure that you're trying to do things that we are driving that agenda as a collective. So I find that quite a useful framework for what you can do going away today, alongside having a look at Green Impact's website, Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. And Matt would probably want us to shout out to See Sustainability, which has got a lot of information for non-clinical carbon. There's a free GP carbon footprint calculator that you can go on and have a look for your practice. And I just think, just very quickly on the practice-based level, I found that it's just so crucial that you get another person doing it with you. Like we've said before, I tried to do it as a trainee, didn't make any progress. When I went to my new practice, I had the operations manager who was fully on board, and she's now, I've left practice and she's going to do an NHS forest in the back. You know, she's taken it with her. So I think, again, that idea of how you bring people as a group and a local group is true of in organisations as well, is that you need that team mentality.
And I think in terms of that sort of thing about, I think you're absolutely right about the political, and I think that's what I'm most impatient about. It just drives me absolutely insane that politicians are not getting this, because they know, they just are, you know, they would say that they need the mandate to make it happen. Well, we are the mandate, aren't we? We've got to make it happen. You know, we have to push on every door as hard as we can in terms of the political. So that's the bit because once we get that tipping point with politicians, then things really shift. So I do agree. I think that's incredibly important.
Also brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's lots for everyone to think about after this session. I've got another question in the chat. Info Surgery, I'm really sorry, I don't know what your name is, but do you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, hi. It's been very interesting, very, very resourceful conversations that have been going on here. And this query that I have is, what has been the biggest obstacle to change? What is the biggest response that you get to why people don't want to change?
I think within practices, the biggest obstacle is time. So, you know, just getting people to actually, you know, people are just overwhelmed. I think not just because of the pandemic, but because general practice has been underfunded for forever, really, hasn't it? Let's be honest. And people haven't got the headspace to think about it. So I think that's the biggest barrier at practice level. Yeah. Aarti, go on.
I was just going to say, in the places where people do have time or should have time to think about these things, you know, the more sort of strategic levels, I think it's mindset. So it's still, this issue is still seen as optional, peripheral, additional. It's not seen as integral, critical, you know, important, urgent, central. You know, it's not seen as the things that it is. It's seen as and if I have time, it's not core to my job. And it's that mindset shift. And I think that shift is, this is my personal hypothesis, it's not researched, but I think it's because people take what they know about the climate crisis and what they know about their personal carbon footprint, and then they translate that to the clinical realm. And because all of those things aren't clinical, so travel and transport, my home, you know, what I eat, don't feel that clinical, then they think it's not a clinical issue. And so that's where I think part of the problem has been, is a framework for people to think about this. So that framework that Honey just outlined, the 4 principles of sustainable healthcare, I think is potentially really powerful if we can really make that a central way of people understanding this issue. But yeah, I think it's mindset. And I also think potentially existential stuff is just hard for us to understand or accept. You know, we've got the day-to-day, and the day-to-day doesn't change that much. We can see some of the signs of things changing, you know, like, oh, you know, the seasons are changing, there's more extreme weather events, you know, we can see that, we notice it, but on a day-to-day, things feel incremental, not transformational. So it can be quite hard to get that and digest it. It's not something I can hold in my head, you know, or in my heart on a daily basis, really. I have to kind of remind myself sometimes. And I think that's just psychologically quite difficult for us, is to, you know, the don't look up thing, you know, to accept that, yeah, there's a meteor heading to Earth, you know, that can be quite hard, I think. So yeah, even at a strategic level, I think people sort of struggle with it.
I think the other thing to say at a strategic level is it's this really frustrating thing of now having been like practice level and up to ICS level and in some of the national groups as well, is like they say it's got to be the GPs on the ground doing it. And then the GPs on ground say it's got to be the QOF and the incentive. And so you get this like mismatch of what, and this kind of conflict of what they're saying versus what we're saying. And it just needs to be both. I think that's kind of difficult. And I think the other obstacle is that it's complicated. So, you know, when we had the ozone layer, it was like CFC was like the fix. And I think with this, we haven't got a simple fix. So simple fixes mean that you can get everyone to say, we're going to do this thing. Whereas like, even as we've learnt with the toolkit, to have a look at salbutamol overuse is huge and could take a whole team for a year looking at that to really understand all of the difficulties around asthma care. We all know it's got to happen, but to actually affect those changes requires a huge amount of thinking. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned, particularly working with Aarti more recently, is just how much the thinking matters. And we don't fund thinking, we fund action. So we say set up a service and go, and actually the thinking around what that looks like, changing models of care, thinking about these things differently, there isn't the money or space or time for that to happen. And going back to Huddy's point, it's totally lack of time. I thought it was lack of funding. People often bring it back to money. I really don't think it is, because we had a grant locally for everybody to get LED light bulbs, only 6 practices signed up to it. So, and then they were saying, well, we haven't got time if we do get the grant to get someone in to change their light. So I think a huge amount of this is the lack of time. And I think to resource it in a really valued way, and what of the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare say is this should be a domain of quality care. This should be part of our core business. If we resourced it in that way, I think things would change slightly. But in order to sell that to someone, they want deliverables. And at the moment, we don't know what the deliverables are other than trying to reduce emissions. But I think that's why it's so important to think about narrative again, because when we went to the summit with the Mayor of London, I couldn't believe that actually the story of Ellis would not have happened without Stephen Holgate, who was the physician she spoke to. So actually, as doctors, you have an incredibly powerful position, and that story and that discussion around air quality, we would not have got there, unfortunately, unless Ella had died. And those kind of, that's what we're seeing day to day. And you'll know that from working in healthcare, that we see stories all the time that are powerful. And that can motivate change. You see that in commissioning, you know, the picture of the old lady saying, I had a lovely time at my community garden, is going to get more commissioning than all the graphs you can show someone. So yeah, that's I think the obstacles are difficult, basically.
Any leadership kind of position or anything like this, there's going to be obstacles, but there's also going to be really wins and positive things that happen, and improvements in patients' health. So I think this has been such an inspiring session. We've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask if there's any further questions. And whilst doing so, just wanted to really promote joining your local greener practice group. It's always a really friendly group of people, really welcoming. There's no previous experience required in sustainable healthcare. And it's as has been said before, a flat hierarchy where everyone can just come with their ideas or listen to what's happening. So yeah, I'd really encourage anybody who's interested to check out the Greener Practice website and see if your local group is there. I think a lot of areas have a local group, but if there's not one, then get in touch and we can always see if we can support you to set one up in your area. Sorry, Honey, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I was just going to say, just email greenerpractice at gmail.com. I have to remember, yes, greenerpractice@gmail.com, and I can put you in touch with other people in your area. That actually we realised when we were working out how many greener practice groups there were, that they're not even all on the website yet. I can't keep up with them. So there are quite a few that aren't on there. So even if you think there isn't one, there might well be one in your area. So just get in touch, and I will put you in touch with local people that you can network with.
Brilliant. And I'm glad to see a couple of people from the London group who I know already on this call. So it's really good to see some familiar names there. Are there any final questions for our speakers at the moment? No, that's fine. Nish, shall I hand over to you for sort of closing comments?
Yeah, thank you so much, Veena. Firstly, thank you to Veena, who has stepped in to be the main host of this tonight at really short notice because I have COVID and was feeling rubbish. So she's never hosted a webinar, and I think you'll all agree she just did such a good job. So thank you, Veena. I know that probably was a bit nerve-wracking for you, but it didn't show at all. And thank you so much to our speakers, Tamsin, Honey, and Aarti. I must confess, I have not thought about climate change probably in the way that I should be. And I've just been totally blown away by your stories and already thinking about what else I should and could and wish I had been doing about this, and a bit of guilt, but lots of hope about, you know, where I might start. So thank you so much, because I'm not quite sure I was expecting to feel that way, but I got quite emotional. So thank you. And I also really appreciated your advice, which was just, I think, could be applied to anything that people are trying to change. It reminded me a lot about setting up Next Gen, so just finding that one other person to get started, and, you know, the collaborative leadership style. And Honey, your point about, you know, not trying to do it all at once. It's about nurturing other people and enthusing and enabling them to do the things that they're doing already. So lots of parallels to Next Gen. And I think for anything that people might be thinking about wanting to change in their practice, you know, which is exactly what Next Gen tries to inspire people to do, I thought it was so helpful. And Aarti, I think your point about you didn't want to be a leader, you just wanted to do something. I thought that was brilliant, and that captures exactly what Next Gen is about. It's not about a title or a position, it's about just going out there and actually doing something. So thank you all so much, and to Liam, who was our tech support in the background. Thanks, Liam. He's going to probably already has popped the feedback form in the chat, and it's really short, please do fill it out, because it's the only gift that we can give our speakers. And at the end, there'll be a link where you can download a certificate for CPD purposes. But lovely to see you all. If you want to keep in touch with Next Gen, please sign up to our monthly bulletin. The link will be in an email you'll get after the webinar, and the next edition is out next week. And you can listen to our podcast, the Next Gen Cast, and we've got a great episode coming out with Dame Helen Stokes Lampard in a couple of days. So thank you all for being here tonight, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.